Find a comfortable position. Let your body settle without hurry. There is nowhere to go now and nothing you need to hold in place. The day can remain exactly as it is for a little while longer. The cold does not need to leave all at once. The warmth does not need to arrive before it is ready. You only need to let yourself come in from the winter, one quiet moment at a time. Tonight's story is called Falling Asleep by the Hearth in a Winter Great Hall. The snow has already been falling long enough to change the shape of the world before you reach the hall. Not in any violent way, not with the force of a storm, only steadily enough that edges have begun to lose their harder meanings beneath it. The path across the yard is still visible, but less by its own color now than by the way the whitening ground on either side has made it into a darker ribbon. The fence posts beyond it keep their order, though each one now carries a softening weight along the upper edge. The low stone boundary at the far side of the yard no longer reads as a wall made of separate pieces. It has become one long, pale-backed line against the dark winter earth. Your steps have slowed without needing to be told to. The snow does that to a place. It does not stop movement. It simply removes whatever impatience might have been left in it. The air is cold enough to keep the face awake. It touches the bridge of the nose, the upper cheeks, the small uncovered space between glove and sleeve when the hand swings forward. The wool at your shoulders and along your chest keeps the greater part of you well enough. The cold has settled into the outermost layers of the cloak, but not deeply. Beneath that there is still the body's own warmth, carried carefully inward through the yard towards what waits ahead. The hall stands beyond the open stretch of snow-dark ground where the path narrows and the timber walls begin. It does not appear all at once. The roofline comes first, broad and heavy beneath a whitening lay of snow. Then the darker fall of the walls below it. Then the carved posts at the entrance, rising from the drifted edges of the threshold in a way that makes them seem older than the day around them. Older even than the weather settling over them now. The roof does not glitter. The snow upon it is too fresh and the sky too pale for that. It lies there in a clean muted layer, caught along the lower edge of the eaves and in the seam where one long length of timber meets the next. No window calls attention to itself. What light there is belongs to the winter afternoon alone. It rests on the outer boards, pale and thinned, and gathers faintly at the carved edges of the doorway where the wood has been worn smoother by years of hands and shoulders passing close. As you come nearer, the hall grows not grander, but more certain. Its scale becomes easier to feel. The breadth of the wall, the depth of the roof, the way the doorway is set deep enough to keep shadow even in the day. This is not a place built to greet the weather. It is built to outlast it. A few flakes settle against your sleeve and remain there this time instead of melting at once. Others gather along the leather strap at your shoulder and at the upper fold of one glove where the stitching catches them. The ground nearest the hall has already changed more than the outer yard. Snow has found the quieter seams beside the threshold stones and the lee side of the step where the wind reaches less directly. The packed earth close to the wall is darker than the open yard, but only just. Winter is moving across it with patient insistence. You come to the entrance and place your hand on the iron ring. Its chill is immediate and cleaner than the air. Even through the glove, the metal keeps its own distinct cold, the kind made not of wind, but of stillness. One side of the ring has been smoothed by use more than the other. The hand knows that before thought does. The iron has taken the shape of repeated taking up. The wood behind it is rougher near the grain and polished faintly where the ring has struck and rested against it over time. You lift. The sound it makes is contained and low, a dull contact of iron against wood, softened by the snow outside and the depth of the doorway itself. The latch yields without reluctance. The door opens inward on weight well used to moving this way. Its lower edge passes over the threshold with a muted drag, and at once the air changes. Not into warmth yet, only into held cold, only into stillness. Outside, the winter had movement in it, however slight. Falling snow, fine air passing over open ground, the broad, pale weather of the yard and sky. Inside, the cold does not move the same way. It rests. It lies low in the rushes and along the boards. It remains in the long timber of the walls and in the great central hearth not yet raised into flame. It touches the face less keenly than the air outside did. It meets you evenly, as though the hall has taken the winter in and taught it to be quiet. You step across the threshold. The door closes behind you with a heavy wooden answer and the contained settling of the latch. The hall receives that sound and keeps it. It does not throw it back. The timber above and around you is too old, too smoke-darkened, too long accustomed to holding weight, voice, weather, and silence alike. Sound here belongs to the place as soon as it is made. For a moment, you remain where you are, just inside, and let the body learn the new condition fully. The floor nearest the door is colder than the floor farther in. The boards hold that difference clearly through the soles. The lower air carries old smoke in it, not fresh enough to be fire scent, only the faint, dry memory of many evenings stored in timber, beams, carved posts, and roof. The hall is not asleep. Nothing in it has gone slack or stale. It is waiting in its own winter way. The central hearth lies long and dark through the middle of the room. It is not empty. A bed of ash remains, pale at the edges, darker where it keeps a little depth below the surface. Wood has already been laid nearby in readiness, not piled carelessly, not arranged for display, simply placed in the order the evening will ask for it. Smaller pieces first, heavier lengths behind, a poker resting against the stone lip where a hand will naturally reach. The hall does not need to invent its fire from nothing. The means are already there, waiting for the right moment. Along the walls, the benches keep their long, continuous line beneath the darker rise of timber. Their upper rails are smoother in some places than others, polished by years of hands steadying themselves there, by weight lowering, and rising by bodies settling into the same stretches through many winters. The carved support posts that divide the hall from itself stand broader at the base and darken as they rise. The lower parts catch the pale entry light. The upper parts disappear into the dim understructure of the rafters, where the old smoke has lived longest. Above, the roof space holds its own darkness. You cannot yet fully read the beams there, only their downward logic, only the sense of height carried by timber that vanishes before it is fully seen. Somewhere above the hearth's long center, where the roof opens to take smoke when the fire is raised, there is a deeper patch of dark than elsewhere. Not visible in clear outline yet, only present, a place above the place where fire will later live below. The hall's objects remain in waiting form. A broad bowl on the table catches a little light at its rim, and none within. A ladle rests near the great pot, its handle darkened by repeated touch. One cup sits turned on its side farther down the board, as though set there without any thought it would need to be moved before evening. A folded fur lies near one end of a bench, heavier than cloth, quieter than ornament, only itself, and the use it will later take. You lower your cloak from your shoulders. The wool has kept a little of your own warmth inside it, though the outer fold holds winter still. When you lift it free, the hall's colder air meets the neck and collarbone at once, but without the sharpness of the yard. You hang the cloak on a peg set into one of the nearer posts. The peg leans outward by the smallest degree, not enough to fail, only enough to show the long truth of use. The cloak settles against the timber with a soft heaviness, its hem still marked where snow has dampened the outer wool. Your gloves come off next. The skin meets the hall differently without them. The cool air is clearer on the fingers, the grain of the nearest bench rail more distinct under the resting hand. The rail has been smoothed at its center and left rougher toward the underside where hands do not often pass. A carved turning near the post has been brightened slightly by the years, not all over, only where fingers naturally brush it on the way past. Farther in, the hall remains mostly unclaimed by any active light. The winter day enters only as a pale, diluted presence from the doorway and whatever smaller openings the roof and wall allow. It does not fill the room. It touches edges. It finds the nearest boards, the lip of one bench, the lower curve of a pot, the pale ash in the hearth, then thins before reaching higher things. This is not a room made by daylight. It only waits inside it until fire gives it another way to be seen. Outside, the snow continues. You know it even before you turn to the door again. The quiet beyond the timber has altered. The world on the far side of the threshold is already less available than it was in the yard. When at last you glance back, what remains visible through the opening seam and around the deeper edge of the door is not weather as movement, but weather as softening fact. White on the step, white along the track between yard and hall, pale sky flattened by winter cloud, fence posts and stones already losing their separateness beneath the continued fall. You move farther into the hall. The boards answer differently here. One gives a faint, contained creak beneath your weight, not complaint, only acknowledgement. Another remains soundless. The long hearth keeps its place to one side of your path, not yet warm enough to govern the room, but already unmistakably its center. A few rushes along the outer edge of the floor have dried into flatter lines under repeated passing. Closer to the benches, they remain more loosely scattered, less pressed by footsteps, holding the hall's winter cool a little longer. The table stands broad and work-worn within the dim. Its nearer edge is smoother where bodies have drawn close against it. One section along the side carries a shallow dent that has darkened slightly from years of handling. And oil and smoke, though the mark itself remains only a mark, not damage needing thought. A cup rests near the far end, its rim a little thinner on one side than the other where the mouth has met it most often. Nothing about it asks to be admired. It asks only to be used again in due time. A carved post rises near the hearthside bench. You rest your hand against it for a moment. The wood is cooler than skin, but less cold than iron. Its carved surface catches at the palm first in one raised line, then another, before smoothing where the pattern has been worn down by the brushing of shoulders and hands. This is how the hall gives itself away, not through grandeur, but through places that have been touched often enough to become themselves more fully. The furs folded near the wall do not yet belong to sleep, not in the active sense. They are only part of the hall's readiness, like the laid wood, the waiting pot, the long benches, the dark hearth. One edge of a hide lies flatter than the rest, as though often folded back from that same side. The weight of it is visible before it is handled. So is the practical truth of it. Warmth here will not come from one source alone. The hall knows that already. You cross toward the hearth and stop beside it. At this height, the hall arranges itself differently around you. The benches remain along the walls. The table remains broad in the dim. The posts rise, the rafters disappear. The doorway keeps its pale weather light at the far side. But all of it now belongs in relation to the long, dark center of the fire not yet raised. The ash bed remembers previous evenings without giving anything back into the room yet. The wood nearby keeps its dry grain and waiting weight. The poker leans where it should. A flat stone at the side of the hearth holds the place a kneeling body would naturally take. You do not light the fire yet. That matters. The hall is not warm because the story wants warmth quickly. It is only reached, not yet awakened. So instead, you let the room give itself a little more fully in this in-between state. The pot above the hearth is dark at the lower curve, and a little brighter where the metal has been wiped clean, more often near the rim. The ladle beside it has a handle smoother at the grip than at the bowl end where hand does not linger. A second folded fur farther down the bench has been placed with less care than the first, not untidily, only in the shape of having been set down because it was needed there, and not because it had to look arranged. The hall does not stage its own usefulness. It simply keeps it ready. The longer you stand within it, the more the outer winter changes character. At first, it had been weather met by the body. Then it became weather held outside the walls. Now it is becoming something simpler still, the condition that makes the hall necessary. It no longer needs to be watched flake by flake. It is enough to know that it continues, whitening the yard, the fence, the roof edge, the path back out into the open. The hall answers by becoming more itself with each passing minute. When you turn again toward the doorway, the threshold region has already altered simply because you are now properly inside. The cloak hangs on its peg. The colder boards near the door hold their place. The pale outer light has become a boundary rather than an invitation. What had been entry is now the edge of the hall, not warmth. Not even comfort yet, only the certainty that the winter has been left outside, and that everything needed for the night already exists within these walls. The body no longer has any need to go farther. The yard has ended. The weather is outside. The hall is reached. Its coolness no longer feels like exposure. It feels like the first stage of being within a place that will, in time, gather warmth around you and hold the winter off properly. Somewhere high in the roof dark, a faint old timber note answers the cold. Not loud enough to become an event, only enough to prove the structure remains alive to the hour. Then stillness again, then the held air of the hall. You let your hand rest once more on the nearest bench rail. The wood is smoother along the upper line, where bodies have lowered themselves there through many seasons. The lower edge keeps more of its grain. The fur folded nearby waits in the shape of later use. The hearth remains dark but ready. The pot, the ladle, the cups, the carved posts, the smoke-kept rafters, the pale winter at the door, all of them belong to the same structure now, and none of them is asking for admiration. They are not here to be looked at as treasures. They are here because a great hall in winter needs them, and because the body entering from the snow has already begun to need them too. Outside, the snow continues. The yard beyond the threshold is harder to read now. The darker path remains only by contrast. The fence has become a sequence of pale-topped shapes with less and less space between them. The roof edge outside the entrance carries a thicker whiteness than it did when you arrived. Light has not gone. It has only withdrawn from the farthest things first. Inside, the hall waits at exactly the right point in the cycle. Not empty, not warm, not dark, only ready. You remain still for one moment longer and let the whole structure keep its present condition around you. The boards hold the last of their winter cool. The central hearth has not yet opened into flame. The pot has not yet taken heat. The benches remain in waiting form. The furs remain folded. The upper darkness still belongs more to roof and smoke memory than to visible beam. Everything that matters later is already here. Nothing has begun. And there, with the door shut against the weather, the last of the outdoor cold still resting lightly through the hall, the carved posts and long benches gathered into their waiting winter form, and the hearth lying dark at the center beneath the unseen roof opening above, the next true act becomes clear at last: to wake the fire. You kneel at the hearth because the hall has reached the point where kneeling there is the only right next act. The long fire lies dark through the center of the room. It's ash pale where old burning reached its last dry state, and deeper in color, where the lower layers still keep the memory of weight, and heat without any heat remaining in them now. The stone edging at the near side is smoother in the places where hands and tools have found it most often. One corner has been darkened by years of contact from the poker's hook, where it is set back in place after use. The laid wood waits beside the ash in quiet order. Smaller pieces nearest, heavier lengths beyond, a bundle of thinner kindling tied once with cord, and then loosened again, as though whoever last prepared it knew that the evening would want readiness more than neatness. You reach for the poker. Its handle is colder than skin and smoother at the grip than along the shaft where no hand lingers. The iron near the hook has been brightened in a narrow band by repeated contact with ash, grate, and wood, while the rest keeps its darker finish under the soot memory of many fires. When you lower it to the ash bed, the first sound it makes is dry, and contained, not a scrape, so much as a hush with metal inside it. You draw the old ash back by a few inches. The lighter surface lifts and settles without resistance. Beneath it, the deeper ash is finer, more compact, touched with a darker gray that shows where the last fire burned lower and longer before going out. A small charred piece from the previous evening lies off to one side, black and featherlight. You shift it back with the hook and leave it where later heat may find it again if it chooses. The paper beneath the kindling has already been tucked into the right shape for catching, not folded flat, turned and twisted, with one edge loosened enough to take a flame easily. The thinner wood crosses above it with the kind of open care that allows breath through. Two small logs lie behind, not yet touching the place where flame will begin, but close enough that the fire, once established, will not have far to travel. The fire has not been left to be invented, only to be woken. You set the poker down and strike the flint. The spark catches the tinder in one brief bright instant, sharper than anything else in the hall. The first flame is small and concentrated, gold-white at its base, then softer as it leans into the paper's loosened edge. For a moment, the hall does not answer at all. The boards remain as they were. The lower air remains cool. The carved posts, the benches, the table, the fur by the wall, none of these changes merely because a first brightness has appeared. Fire must persuade a hall. It has to find its own way into the materials that will hold it. The paper darkens, curls inward, and gives itself quickly. A thin tongue of flame rises between two pieces of kindling, and then falters where the cooler wood above has not yet agreed to take it. Another catches lower down where the paper has fallen in on itself. This one lasts a little longer. It reaches deeper into the dry, thin sticks, and when it folds upward again, it finds a second place to remain. For a few moments, the fire is all trying. A bright edge, a dimming, a second catching, a pause where it seems to think better of itself, then another reach upward. You do not hurry it. That belongs to the practice as much as the lighting itself. If the kindling is moved too soon, the flame must begin again. If it is left entirely to chance, one good catching may die in its own uncertainty. There is a moment when watching is the right labor, and this is that moment. A fine thread of smoke rises from the paper and low wood. At first, it hesitates at the front of the hearth, not thick enough to trouble the room, only uncertain enough to show that the hall has not yet chosen its direction. Then, as the little flames strengthen, the upper dark above the fire begins to answer. The smoke turns, not sharply, only surely. It is drawn upward through the held dimness of the hall towards the deeper unseen opening in the roof above. And once that happens, the whole structure alters by one quiet degree. The fire has been accepted upward. Now it can begin downward and outward too. A first faint crack comes from the thinnest stick where the flame has found drier wood. Then another, lower and more assured, from nearer the center. The sound is small, but it changes the room more than the match did. The match belonged to the hand. This belongs to the hall. The brighter paper burns down quickly now, leaving low redness beneath the kindling. The thin sticks hold the flame with greater certainty. The orange at their edges is no longer tentative. It lifts more steadily, and where it touches the underside of the first small log, the bark darkens and begins to curl back from the wood beneath. You take up the poker again and ease one of the thinner pieces a little nearer. Not much, only enough to help flame meet what it is already trying to reach. The iron touches wood with a low, contained contact. A spark lifts and vanishes before it can matter. The kindling settles. This time the fire answers more fully, two joined flames rising where before there had been one, and a doubt. Beneath them, the ash bed is no longer only memory. It is becoming the first place in the hall to hold active heat. You sit back on your heels and let the next few moments happen without interference. The kindling burns lower. The first log catches more convincingly along one split edge. The underside of another begins to glow where the heat has thickened below it. The front bar of the grate remains too cool to matter as warmth, but the eye already reads it differently. Dark iron has become iron in relation to flame. That is the hall's first answer. The second comes in the air, not all at once, only as a slight change in the space before the hearth, where the room's earlier coolness loosens into layers. The front of your hands feels something now that the backs do not. The knees nearest the fire meet a gentler air than the sides of your legs farther out. The hall is no longer one single winter condition. It has begun to divide itself by distance from the fire. You return the poker to its place. The hook meets the stone edge with a small sound that belongs to this room as naturally as the latch belonged to the great door. Everything here has its own right scale of noise. None of it needs excess. Now the water. The fire may yet be young, but the second system of the evening can begin beside it. The iron pot near the hearth is heavier in the hand than it looked from standing height. Not burdensome, only real. The handle has darkened and smoothed where it is most often gripped. Its side keeps a dull bloom of old heating and cooling, and one side of the rim is slightly brighter where cloth and hand have polished it over time. You carry it to the barrel at the wall. The ladle waiting there has a bowl more worn at the lip than at the base, and its handle has been made easier by use in just one place, where the fingers close. You fill the pot only to the level the hall and evening will need. The water enters with a hollow metal sound at first, then deepens as the level rises. Cold, clean, clear in its note against the iron. When you set the pot onto the hanging hook above the growing flame, the whole arrangement of the hearth changes again. Fire below, iron above, water now included. What was only a fire becoming itself is now the beginning of evening properly arranged. The hall answers by tightening inward another degree. You turn to the cup on the table. Its rim is thinner on one side than the other, worn not by breakage, but by long repeated use. The bowl keeps a faint stain low inside where hot drink has darkened the glaze over time, without ever truly marking it as damage. Beside it lies a spoon whose bowl is brighter than its handle, and a small pot of honey sealed with a lid that does not sit tightly, so much as correctly. None of these asks for ceremony. They ask only to be used in the order winter evenings require. Behind you, the fire answers with a deeper crack from the first small log properly catching at last. When you turn back, the flames have changed character again. They no longer search only among paper and kindling. They are finding the wood meant to carry them. One seam beneath the nearer log burns brighter than the rest. A section of bark has blackened and drawn back. The smoke no longer hesitates at all before rising into the roof dark. The hall's upper dimness has now joined the fire system fully. The hearth gives upward, the opening above receives, and between those 2 points, the whole room begins to shape itself differently. You bring a bench cushion and one folded fur nearer the fire, not close enough to idle in heat, only close enough that the body, when seated, will not need to reach toward what the hall is already making available. The bench nearest the hearth has a rail polished by long use. When you set a hand against it, the wood is cooler on the shaded side and less cool where the rising fire has already begun to work on it. One end of the fur is flatter than the rest, as though often folded from that same side and laid across the same place. You set it along the bench without fuss. It settles into itself at once, heavy and quiet. Already the hearth side of the hall has begun to part company with the farther reaches. The carved post nearest the fire catches movement, now where before it held only pale daylight. The lower cut lines brighten and darken by turns as the flames alter. The table edge nearest the hearth loses some of its winter flatness and takes on a warmer tone. The outer wall remains cooler. The door region remains cooler still. The long room is becoming a series of conditions arranged around one growing center. You draw the bench a little nearer. Its feet answer the boards with a soft wooden drag. One catches where a board edge lifts a fraction above the next, then passes over. The sound does not travel far. The hall keeps it. The fire settles deeper into itself. What had been quick earlier is now broader. The flames do not rise in little attempts and vanishings. They move upward with more confidence, taking their shape from the spaces the wood and iron give them. Every now and then a small inward shift of one log sends a brief brighter shower through the center before it disappears again into steadier burning. Heat begins to live in the stone nearest the grate. Not enough yet to be called comfort at a distance, only enough that the place before the hearth is no longer neutral ground. The pot above the fire gives its first small answer. Not boiling, not even near enough for that. Only a contained metal note as iron begins to receive heat unevenly and settle into it. Then stillness. Then another quieter one. It is enough. The second domestic system has truly joined the first now. Fire and water are keeping the hall together between them. Outside, the snow continues. You notice it once when you look back toward the great door, but not in the same way as before. The world beyond it is no longer a thing to read. It has become weather held at the boundary. Pale yard, dark path, whitened roof edge, fence and stone already losing detail. The hall has begun to make those things irrelevant, not by denying them, but by becoming more necessary than they are. You sit. The bench receives your weight with a long, low wooden answer, deeper than the smaller chair sounds of cottage rooms, broader because the wood is broader, the room larger, the timbers older. The fur beneath and beside you changes the contact at once. It does not soften the bench into disappearance. It only lets the body meet it without hardness. One edge of the hide comes over your knees. Another remains folded near the hip where it can be drawn further later if needed. For a few moments you do nothing except remain there. The fire is close enough now that warmth reaches the fronts of the hands clearly. Then the knees. Then, if you incline a little toward it, the lower face. The rest of the hall stays cooler. The benches farther down the wall remain untouched by this first true hearth warmth. The table's far side remains winter held. The doorway and threshold still belong more to weather than to fire. The room is not becoming warm, it is becoming ordered. The pot begins to move more fully within itself. A low, rounded interior shift of water, then stillness, then another. Steam does not yet rise in any visible way, but the hall already knows what the sound means. The cup on the table is no longer simply waiting. It has become the next thing. You rise only enough to take the pot from the hook when it is ready, and the heat of it is distinct in the hand before anything else changes. You pour. The water meets the cup in a quiet, dark curve, and at once the bench-side region of the hall alters again by one small, truthful degree. The cup that had only been part of the table's waiting order is now warm in the hand. The spoon is lifted, touched to honey, drawn back, used, then set down again with a small light contact against the board. A narrow thread of steam rises, visible against the dim beyond the hearth only for a moment before it disappears into the broader air of the hall. You settle again with the cup between your hands. The warmth it offers is stronger than the room's warmth, but more contained. It belongs to the hands and chest rather than the air. The first sip carries that same contained heat inward. Nothing about it is elaborate. Warm drink, fire, bench, fir, winter hall, timber dark above. All of it simple enough to lose itself almost at once into use. A hall becomes itself most fully not when its things are admired, but when they begin to be used in the right order. The fire burns, the water heats, the cup warms the hands, the fur settles, the bench holds. The room gathers inward around those acts and becomes evening without any need to announce that it has done so. Outside, the snow continues, but now it has stopped being something to consult. At first, the snow was weather crossing the yard. Then it was weather on the far side of the great door. Then it was the pale outer condition that sharpened the need for fire. Now it has become continuity. The world beyond the threshold no longer needs to be read in detail. It is enough to know that winter remains there, and that because it remains there, the hall becomes more itself with every passing minute. The fire sinks deeper into the logs. A piece shifts inward and sends a brief, bright stirring up through the grate before the sparks vanish. The sound of it is low and held, more like the hall speaking to itself than like an event. The pot, returned to gentler heat, gives off a faint thread of rising warmth. The cup in your hands cools by degrees where your fingers do not touch it, and remains hotter where they do. The hall no longer has anything to prove from here. It only needs to go on. The firelight establishes the room's second order now. What pale day remained at the entrance has lost its authority. The hearth and its moving light govern the lower hall. The carved posts nearest the center answer first, their worn-cut lines brightening and withdrawing in turn. The iron of the pot and hook glows differently from the wood below them. The bench rail catches a warm line where the fire reaches it and loses it again at once. Higher up, the rafters remain mostly in smoke dark, only occasionally admitting a suggestion of structure when the flames leap higher than usual. The hall is no longer a room waiting inside daylight. It has become an inward place governed by its own center. You drink again. The cup has grown easier to hold. The fur has settled more naturally across your knees. The bench no longer feels like a surface chosen for the evening. It has become the hearth place itself. The body has stopped being in the hall in any general sense. It is here now, at fire with drink, with the first true warmth established. A small sound comes from the outer boards of the hall as the colder evening continues to gather beyond them. Then nothing. Then the hall again. The sound does not disturb the inwardness. It deepens it. The winter outside and the fire within are both continuing, and the timber between them is part of what makes the evening real. The threshold at the far end has receded from importance. The long room between you and it has taken on enough warmth, dimness, and fire-governed shape that the door now belongs less to your experience than the hearth does. The outside world is still there. The snow is still thickening in the yard. The roof still receives it. The path still darkens under it. Yet none of that has force against the bench, the cup, the fire, the fur, the rising warmth at the knees and hands. For a little while longer, you remain where you are and let that be true. The cup lowers. The spoon lies still where it was set down. The pot keeps a quieter heat over the fire. The logs continue their slow, bright work. The carved post nearest the bench holds moving gold at its lower cut lines and darkness above. The benches farther away remain along the wall, part of the hall's shape again rather than part of your use. The outer winter goes on making the far world less immediate. The body feels the rightness of the order now. There is no wish to stand again without reason. No part of you is still half in the yard, half at the threshold, half waiting for the hall to become what it promised it might become. It already has. The warmth at the hands and knees is established. The cup's heat is familiar. The fur has found its weight. The fire no longer needs tending this very minute. The hall is enough. And there, with the fire fully established, the water heated, the cup warm in hand, the bench chosen, the fur gathered, and the outer winter reduced to boundary and pale weather beyond the great door, the hall crosses its first inward threshold at last. The hearth is awake, and evening has truly begun. For a while, nothing more is required than remaining where you are. The fire has already reached the point where it can carry itself without asking for your constant eye. The cup has been warmed, lifted, used, lowered. The fur has found its place across your knees. The bench has stopped feeling like a chosen seat and become simply the hearth place. The hall no longer needs to persuade you that evening has begun inside it. That work is done. What remains is slower than beginning and quieter than arrival. The room has entered use deeply enough to go on without effort. You drink again. The warmth in the cup is more contained now than when it was first poured. It belongs to the hands and chest, not to the whole body. The fire's warmth belongs to the face, the knees, the front of the shins. The fur belongs to the lap and lower body. The hall itself remains cooler beyond those gathered circles. None of these conditions competes with the others. They have already found their order. That is one of the evening's truest comforts. Not that everything becomes warm, but that warmth settles where it should and is trusted to remain there. The firelight reaches farther now than it did when the logs were only beginning to catch. Not greatly farther, only more surely. The carved post nearest the hearth no longer brightens and dims in uncertain flashes. It holds a steadier, changing glow now, the lower cut lines moving in and out of gold as the flames shift, while the deeper hollows of the carving keep their own shadow. When you look more closely, the pattern resolves into something half familiar and older than any one evening's use. A twisting line that might once have been beast or serpent, worn softer where hands have brushed it over the years, interrupted where smoke and touch have darkened the grain into one quieter surface. The carving is not here to be deciphered. It is here because this hall has known many winters, and because winter places remember by keeping marks in wood. Farther along the wall, the long bench begins to separate itself into sections the fire can reach, and sections it cannot. The nearer rail keeps a warm line along its upper edge, brightening where the wood has been polished by generations of sleeves, palms, and settling bodies. Beyond that, the bench falls back into a darker use memory, still present, still clearly part of the hall, but no longer participating in the same immediate way. The hall is dividing itself by nearness to flame, and that division makes the room feel truer, not smaller. The cup lowers again to your knee. The fur shifts a little with the movement and settles back. The hall beyond the hearthside remains broad enough to keep its own distance. That matters. This is not a cottage room being made complete by a single fire. It is a longer, taller, more communal structure, and even in stillness it keeps some part of that scale. The table remains in the dim with its broader shape intact, one end a little more visible where firelight reaches the nearer corner, the rest withdrawing into lower brown shadow. A bowl catches one edge of glow along its rim and keeps darkness within. A hanging cloak farther down the wall has begun to emerge not as fabric only, but as weight. One shoulder fold, one heavier lower edge, one fastening at the throat where metal holds a dull answer to the light and then loses it again. Above, the hall remains mostly in roof dark. The fire governs the lower world first. It lays claim to boards, bench rails, cup rims, carved post edges, fir, pot, and the lower run of timber where human life has always happened nearest the heat. But the rafters keep their own greater dimness. They belong partly to smoke memory, partly to height, partly to whatever old weather the hall has carried across. So many seasons that the upper structure no longer needs full light to remain itself. Once or twice, when one log shifts and the flames rise higher, a beam end reveals itself more clearly. A carved turning, a knot in the grain, a line of old soot kept darker than the wood around it, then withdraws again before becoming a thing to study. That upper darkness is part of the hall's mythology, not because it hides anything dramatic, because it allows the room to remain older than the evening currently happening within it. You set the cup on the board beside you for a moment and let your hand rest on the bench. The wood is warmer here now than when you first sat down. Not heated, only touched long enough by the fire to stop feeling entirely winter-kept. The difference is slight, but the body notices it at once. The hall is not merely lit now. It is being altered slowly by the presence of the hearth. That alteration is part of what makes the room feel inhabited rather than simply occupied. The pot above the fire gives a small contained sound from within. Not a boil, only a quieter shifting of water held near heat for a long while. That sound joins the rest of the hall's evening voice. The low settlement of wood in the fire, the occasional small answer from a board under heat or cold, the softer shift of fur when you move, the held silence between those things. No single one of these matters much on its own. Together they create the hall's second life, the one that begins after the active work of lighting, pouring, moving, and choosing has ended. You look farther down the room. A chest sits against the wall beyond the table, broad-lidded and iron-banded. The fire does not fully reach it, but gives enough to show the brightened curve where hands have lifted the lid most often, and the darker wear along one lower corner where boots or bench legs have struck it over the years. Beside it hangs a round shield, not polished into display, only kept. The boss catches a small low light and lets it go. The painted edge, what remains of it, is less color now than memory of color, deepened by smoke and time. It is enough. The shield does not need to tell a story outright. Its continued presence tells one already. A post worn by many hands, a shield kept through many winters, a bench polished where bodies have sat and spoken and eaten and waited out storms, a chest whose lid has been lifted, so often the wood has learned the hand before the eye, a roof dark full of smoke-kept beams that have watched fire rise and sink countless times before this one. The hall does not feel legendary because it is explained as legendary. It feels legendary because nothing in it belongs only to tonight. You lift the cup again. The drink is cooler now, though still warm enough to belong properly to the evening. The rim meets the mouth along the same thinner side as before. The body knows that before thought names it. The sip is simpler too, less heat to register, more steadiness. This is another way the hall has moved on from beginning. The first warmth of fire and drink has passed into use. Everything now is less about becoming and more about continuing. Outside, the winter remains at the threshold and beyond the walls. You do not need to see it fully to know that. Once, very faintly, a small dry touch comes at the outer timber where wind and snow meet the hall and go no farther. The sound is rounded before it reaches you, thinned by wall, distance, and the deeper authority of the fire within. The weather is still there, but it no longer presses equally on every part of the room. The hearth has reduced it, not erased it, reduced it to boundary and condition. The lamp is lit next, not because the fire is failing, because evening in a hall needs more than one kind of light. The oil dish sits farther along the table than the cup did, its rim darker where old smoke has touched it, brighter where fingers have steadied it while the wick was trimmed. You rise, cross the short hearth-governed distance, and bring it nearer. The flame you give it is smaller and steadier than the hearth's moving tongues below. When it catches, it does not change the room as fire changed it. It makes a narrower claim, a closer certainty. The cup, the nearer board, the edge of the bench, the lower part of the carved post, one iron fitting on the chest, one section of the wall behind you, all of these sharpen gently into clearer relation. The fire moves, the lamp holds. Together they give the hall its full evening architecture. The hearth remains the deeper center, rising and settling, changing the lower room by warmth and motion. The lamp, smaller and more deliberate, lets the farther part of the hall keep its darkness without losing its shape entirely. The shield's boss answers it. The chest's iron band answers it. One hanging cloak farther down the wall becomes cloth again rather than shadow. The carved lines of the nearer post no longer rely only on moving flame to exist. They can rest for a while in steadier amber. This is the point where the great hall stops belonging to afternoon altogether. Whatever pale outer day remains outside the walls belongs to weather now, not to the room. Inside, evening has taken full possession. You settle again at the bench, fur drawn a little higher over one side. The cup rests nearer your hand now. The lamp's smaller field and the fire's broader breathing light have established their relation well enough that the room no longer feels like a large place with one warm corner. It feels like a hall that has chosen how much of itself to reveal tonight. That matters. Too much light would reduce it to furniture and beams. Too little would make it only darkness and fire. What you have instead is the right middle state. Enough seen to trust the hall, enough shadow left to keep its depth. The body feels the shift too. There is less of you at a fire now, and more of you within an old structure carrying winter night. The distinction is slight, but real. The bench beneath you is no longer just seating. It is a place others have used in this same relation to the hearth over many seasons. The carved post beside you is no longer merely wood. It is a winter-worn keeper of touch, smoke, and nearness to flame. The shield down the wall is no longer an object at rest. It is one more sign that the hall has outlasted many evenings and means to outlast this one as well. You do not need any spoken story for the hall to feel full of them. The hall itself is the saga form here. Post, bench, chest, cup, fur, shield, smoke dark beam, winter wall, hearth, lamp. Each one has survived enough repetition to stop feeling temporary. The fire sinks a little deeper into the logs. A lower seam of orange opens under one length of wood and then narrows again. One piece settles and sends a brief inward shower up before the sparks vanish against the dim. The sound is contained. Familiar already. The hall has learned tonight's fire properly now. It no longer reacts to each shift as change. It folds each small sound into its broader evening voice. You lower the cup to the board beside you for the last time. There is no wish for more drink right now. No wish to stand without reason. The hall has reached the point where objects can remain where they have been used and still belong more to the life of the room than to any unfinished task. The hall no longer feels preparatory. It feels lived in enough to begin carrying you toward the next inward stage of night. The lamp keeps its smaller amber pool. The fire keeps its deeper gold and red. The roof dark remains mostly its own. The long room beyond the hearthside bench has not disappeared, but it has yielded its urgency. The farther bench, the shield, the chest, the cloaks, the carved timber, the upper beams, all of them remain present without requiring active notice. The hall is complete in evening form now, and because it is complete, another possibility begins to gather almost without being named. Not departure from the hall, not abandonment of the hearth, only the knowledge that this room has now become inward enough for the night to deepen beyond sitting. The furs farther down the wall are no longer just stored warmth. The darker recess beyond the nearer post is no longer only part of the hall's shape. The room, without ceasing to be a hall, has started to admit the idea of sleep into itself. Not yet fully, not by making you rise, only by becoming the kind of place where sleep would now belong naturally if it came. For a little while longer, you remain where you are, and let that be true. The bench holds, the fur keeps its weight, the fire no longer needs tending, the lamp keeps its narrow steadiness. The outer winter stays at the walls and door as softened boundary only. The carved timbers and old-kept objects have taken their places within the larger shape of the evening. And there, with the hearthside world fully inhabited, the fire and lamp now sharing the work of giving the hall its night form, and the old room no longer merely sheltering the body from winter, but carrying the weight of many winters quietly around it, the great hall reaches its next true condition at last. The evening below is complete, and the night is ready to deepen into rest. You remain at the hearth a little longer because the hall has not yet finished becoming what it needs to be before you leave it. The fire is low enough now to be trusted, and high enough still to keep its authority. It no longer asks for the kind of attention it needed when wood was first catching. The seams beneath the heavier logs glow steadily. Every now and then a brighter line opens where one piece settles further into the heat below it, then narrows again. The pot near the fire has grown quieter. The cup rests empty on the board beside you. The lamp keeps its smaller amber field without wavering. The hall has reached that rare rightness where every nearby thing is in use or has just been used, and nothing in it feels unfinished. That is why you can leave it, not because the warmth has lessened or the bench become less welcoming, but because the evening below has completed itself. The hearthside world no longer needs your full presence to remain what it has become. The fire can go on. The lamp can hold its smaller certainty. The carved post, the bench rail, the table with cup and spoon, the long room beyond them, the older kept things at the wall and in the dark above, all of it has entered a steadier phase now. The hall can carry itself forward. You set the cup farther back from the edge of the board. The spoon lies where it was placed after the last stirring. One line of warmth remains in the cup side where your hand held it most recently, but that too is already beginning to soften into the room. The fur over your knees is lifted, folded once, and not neatly, only enough to keep its weight gathered. When your hand leaves the bench rail, the wood is warmer there than when it was first touched, and that slight change feels like the hall's way of marking that you have belonged to this place for a while now. You lift the lamp. Its handle is warmer near the base than farther up where the metal rises away from the glass. The flame stays steady inside the chimney as you bring it free of the board. At once the hall alters. The bench behind you loses some of its certainty. The table remains visible only where the lamp passes. The carved post nearest the hearth still answers the fire with moving gold, but the farther objects now return more quickly to shadow when your light leaves them. The hall does not disappear. It redistributes itself. You stand once before the fire and look back properly. The hearthside world remains complete, the bench with its fur, the board with the cup and spoon, the carved post holding low firelight in its worn lines, the pot near the heat, the outer door now far less important than the room between it and the fire. And at the center, the hearth itself, deeper and steadier than before, no longer all flame, but not yet embers either, strong enough to keep the hall inward. It is good to leave a place only when it has fully become itself. Then you turn from it. The sleeping place lies not outside the hall's life, but along one side of it where night narrows the larger room into something more personal. The first few steps away from the hearth make the hall's temperature changes plain at once. The fronts of your legs no longer receive the same direct warmth. The air at the side of the body cools first. The hand carrying the lamp remains warm at the fingers nearest the metal and cooler at the wrist where the sleeve falls back from it. The body feels the distance increasing long before the eye names where it is going. The boards sound different away from the hearthside bench. Nearer the fire, they had answered more softly, as though warmth and repeated use had drawn a lower note out of them. Here the sound is clearer, still held, still belonging to the hall, but thinner at the edges, more winter kept. One plank gives a contained wooden answer, and then is done. Another nearer, the wall remains firm beneath your step and says nothing at all. The sleeping place is built into the hall rather than set apart from it. It runs along the side wall beneath a lower stretch of timber where the hall's height begins to feel less vast and more sheltering. A raised platform, broad enough for lying, long enough to let the body settle without curling against its own length, edged at one side by a smooth rail polished where hands and knees have used it in the same places over many nights. A carved upright at the nearer end is brighter where fingers have caught it while turning in or out. Behind it, the wall keeps the darker warmth of wood that has lived beside fire smoke and winter clothing for many seasons. The bedding is already there, not arranged ceremonially, only kept in the order the hall knows. A lower mattress stuffing, firm and honest beneath its woven cover. A thicker woolen layer over that. Two furs turned back from one side where the entry to the bed place is always made. A bolster, longer than a pillow, carrying a known compression at its center, and less at the ends where no head rests as long. One blanket folded once across the lower half, its edge thinned along a long-used crease. Nothing here asks to be admired. Everything asks only to be entered in the right sequence. The lamp reveals the sleeping place gradually rather than all at once. First the edge rail, then the wool layer, then the folded back fur catching amber along its longer hairs while the hide beneath remains darker. Then the bolster, then the farther corner, where the light reaches only enough to prove the bed place continues without needing to show every seam. This is not a second room. It is the hall made narrower and kinder at night. Behind you, the fire still exists and still governs the lower center of the hall, but from here it has already changed character. It no longer touches the body directly. It reaches as lower glow, a farther warmth, a structural heart the sleeping place can trust without needing to sit before it. The hall is beginning to divide itself into nearer and farther forms of protection. You set the lamp on the small ledge beside the platform. Its light gathers the sleeping place and leaves the rest of the hall to the fire and the dark between them. The arrangement changes at once. The raised bed is now the nearest world. The hall remains around it, but not equally. The carved upright, the folded fur, the bolster, the board edge, one section of wall, and the shadowed line where the platform runs farther back, these become immediate. Beyond them, the hall keeps its larger presence at a respectful distance. You touch the edge rail. The wood is smoother where bodies have steadied themselves, and rougher farther down where no hand needs to linger. One nick in the grain has been darkened by time until it reads less like damage than part of the place's memory. The sleeping platform does not need to announce that it has held many nights before this one. Its surfaces already know it. You turn back the upper fur a little farther. The underside is cooler than the top that has sat longer in the room's held air. Beneath it, the woven blanket is cooler again, but cleanly so, without the outdoor bite of stone or iron. It has the dry, stored feel of bedding that has been waiting properly. One side of the blanket lifts more easily than the other because the fold has learned that movement through repetition. The bed place has not been prepared from nothing for this night. You begin to remove what remains of the day. The heavier outer layer first, eased from the shoulders, and laid over the rail where it can keep the shape of its fold without slipping. Belt or fastening loosened next. Boots set on the boards below with their toes turning slightly inward by habit. The body beneath them meets the cooler hall air more directly for a few moments, and the difference between hearthside warmth and sleeping place coolness becomes clearer than ever. Sleep does not begin by bringing the fire with you. It begins by trusting that the bed will make its own warmth where the hall has left room for it. You sit on the edge of the platform. The sleeping place receives you honestly. It does not sink far. It does not remain hard. One place yields, then steadies. The bedding lets the body know at once that it is made to hold a whole night rather than merely the first few moments of getting in. The fur beside your hand is heavier than it looked when folded back. The blanket beneath it is smoother where bodies have pressed it flatter over time. The bolster holds its own quiet shape and does not yet belong to your head. The hall around you sounds different from here. You cannot see the fire in full now, only its lower effect. Once or twice, a small inward settling from the hearth reaches this side of the room, rounded by distance and timber. The sound no longer belongs to direct companionship. It belongs to reassurance. The pot or iron near the hearth answers once with a smaller note and then is still. Between those quiet proofs, the hall keeps its own larger silence. Boards, wall, roof dark, old-kept objects, winter beyond the door, all one broad structure carrying the fire at its center and the sleeping place at its edge. You draw your legs up and under the bedding. The first touch of the lower woven layer is cool and immediate, not severe. Not resisting, only truthful. Then the fur comes over it, and the difference between what has been warmed by room air and what has not yet met the body is briefly plain. One section lies cool across the shin. Another, folded longer against itself, holds a little less of that first contrast. The blanket comes over both. This is another system entirely from the hearth below. No flame, no iron. No bright center in the room, only body heat meeting wool and hide and beginning the slower work of making the sleeping place your own. You shift a little farther in. The platform edge leaves the body behind. The wall remains to one side in dim timber shadow. The bolster receives your shoulder first, then your head as you lower properly to it. It is not soft in the sense of disappearing. It has a long-used give at the center and firmer support at the sides. The cover is smoother along the middle than near the seam. Beneath all of it, the deeper layer of the sleeping platform holds through shoulder, side, and thigh in one broad, honest line. The lamp does what the fire can no longer do from here. Its glow gathers the bed space, the edge rail, the fold of fur over your knees, the nearest part of the wall, the corner of the platform where the blanket falls, the line of your outer clothes where they rest over the rail. Beyond that, the hall remains present but uninsistent. The carved post nearer the hearth can still be imagined. The bench can still be known to remain by the fire. The shield and chest and long table still belong to the room, yet from here they are no longer objects asking to be separately held in awareness. They have begun to become the farther hall. You draw the fur and blanket a little higher. At once the larger room loses some of its claim, and the sleeping place becomes the first world. Fur, wool, bolster, body, platform, lamp. Around that, the hall. Around the hall, winter beyond wall and door and roof. The fire below and farther off continues to keep the hall's lower heart alive. You do not need to look toward it. Once or twice there comes the faintest low answer from that direction, wood settling, a softer inward sound from the grate, nothing sharp enough to become a vent. Those sounds matter only because they prove that the hall remains active at its center while you lie at its edge. The sleeping place is not separate from the hall's life. It rests within it. The lamp flame is lowered a fraction. Its amber field contracts slightly. The farther edge of the platform darkens. The wall beside you loses some detail and keeps only tone. The rail where your outer layer hangs remains visible enough to stay part of the sleeping arrangement, but not enough to compete with it. This is not darkness yet, only the bed place entering another degree of night. The body feels that too. There is no wish now to rise and tend the fire again. The hearth can carry itself. The hall below has reached its evening form. The bench and cup and pot and lamp place near the fire remain where they were left, but they no longer ask to be part of your immediate world. Everything here at the sleeping platform has reached its first night form. The hall has closed gently around you without needing to become small. You lie a little deeper into the bedding and let the arrangement make itself more complete by not resisting it. The bolster keeps its shape. The fur settles further at the shoulder and side. The blanket carries more weight at the lower legs than at the upper body. The hall remains cooler than the bed space. The fire remains farther than the lamp. The roof dark remains beyond both. You no longer belong to the hearth directly. You belong to the hall through the sleeping place now. For a while longer, you remain where you are and let it be true. The lamp stays low. The fire stays farther off and lower in the room. The bedding begins its slower work of holding your warmth. The wall beside you, the platform beneath you, the broader hall beyond you, and the winter outside the timber all keep their places without asking to be separated too sharply. And there, with the hearth no longer the place of direct contact, but the lower heart of the hall, with the sleeping platform now entered and beginning to warm around the body, and with the old room carrying both fire and bed within one winter structure broad enough to hold them properly apart, the night crosses its next true threshold at last. You are no longer at the hearth. You are within the hall's sleeping place, and the deep night can begin. For a while, nothing more is required than remaining where you are. The sleeping place has already done its first work. The fur and will have lost their first coolness where the body met them. The bolster no longer feels like something arranged beneath your head. It has become the shape that receives it. The platform beneath all of it holds broad and steady through shoulder, side, thigh, and lower legs, not asking to be thought about again. The hall remains around you, but at a greater distance now than when the lamp was first set beside the bed place, and the fire was still a more active companion. The lamp stands low on the ledge beside you. Its flame has been turned down until it keeps only the smallest amber field, the nearest fold of fur, the edge of the platform rail, one strip of wall board, the darker shape of your outer layer where it hangs close at hand. Beyond that, the sleeping place gives itself gradually to the hall dark. The farther side of the platform is no longer clearly separate from the room beyond it. The carved upright at the bed's end keeps only one line of light along its smoother edge. The rest has already gone back into shadow. The body does not need more than that. Below and farther off, the fire still exists. You do not see it directly now. You do not need to. Once or twice, the faintest low answer comes from that part of the hall. A small inward settling in the wood, a muted shift from the hearth, not sharp enough to become a vent, only clear enough to prove that the lower warmth has not gone out. The fire is no longer a visible center from here. It has become structure, a lower heldness within the hall, keeping one part of the building warmer than another, keeping the long room inward while the winter remains outside the walls. The lamp flame narrows once and steadies again. You watch it only long enough to know that it can now be let go. Its light no longer feels like evening light. It is the last deliberate light before the hall belongs more fully to the night, and the bedplace more fully to the body within it. Outside, the snow continues. It gives almost nothing of the world away now. The outer dark beyond the hall is no longer yard or fence or path or roof edge in any useful sense. It has become one whitened darkness beyond wall and timber, enough to say that winter remains, but not enough to make that winter readable. The snow has finished its earlier work of softening detail. Now it does a quieter work. It removes distance. It leaves the hall surrounded, not threatened, simply held apart. You reach one hand out from beneath the covering and lower the lamp a little more. The room changes at once, but quietly. The platform rail loses its continuous edge. The hanging outer layer becomes a denser patch of dark rather than a garment. The nearest wall board keeps one pale vertical difference in tone, and then gives that up too. The bedplace does not disappear with the room. It grows truer. Fur, blanket, bolster, body, the warmer place beneath the covers where your legs have already altered the bedding from waiting object to inhabited one. These remain. Everything else takes one measured step back. Night in a winter hall should not arrive by darkness alone. It should arrive by reducing what still needs to be seen. For a few moments longer, the lamp remains lit in this smaller state. The flame now gathers only a narrow amber hollow beside the sleeping place. It no longer competes with the hall dark. It lives inside it. The body no longer depends on it. The hall no longer depends on it either. Its last work is not illumination. It is transition. Somewhere lower in the timbers, the hall answers once with a small contained note. Not repeated, not a pattern. Only old wood adjusting to deeper night and colder outer weather while the lower hearth still keeps its quieter warmth within the structure. Then nothing. Then the bed place again. You lower the lamp once more. The flame contracts. For a moment it sharpens rather than dims, then steadies lower still. The chimney keeps one final small oval of light. Then the darkness beyond that oval thickens by another degree. The sleeping place remains. The bolster keeps its shape. The coverings keep their weight. The platform no longer needs to be seen in order to keep being the platform. At last, you turn the flame down until it goes. The dark that follows is not full darkness. The hall has too much winter outside it, too much snow beyond wall and roof for that. A pale suggestion remains somewhere beyond the sleeping place, not enough to show the outer world, only enough to keep the larger night from becoming blank. The platform still holds its edges through touch rather than sight. The wall beside you does not vanish. It recedes into hall dark, the kind that belongs to old familiar structures when no more is required of them. The withdrawal of light does not break the hall. It simplifies it. This is where the great room begins to change from a place of used evening objects into one deeper sleeping condition. The ledge beside you is no longer lamp and rail and hanging cloth. It is only the bedside region of the sleeping place. The hearth below is no longer flame in a long fire. It is lower warmth, remembered and occasionally heard. The long room beyond is no longer bench, chest, shield, post, and table separately. It is the farther hall. The outer winter is no longer snowfall over known ground. It is the white dark beyond the walls. The hall stops presenting itself in parts. It begins to hold together. You lie within that without needing to help it. There is no reason now to adjust the bolster, test the fur, or reconsider the line of your shoulder against the bedding. That work is done. The body is not negotiating with the platform any longer. It is being held by it. The same is becoming true of the hall. A faint lower sound comes from the hearth side again, so low it might almost be mistaken for the memory of one, if not for the slight answering awareness it creates through the platform, the wall, the larger timbered body of the room. What remains below has passed out of firelight and into ember presence. No flame need be seen for that to be known. The hall carries embers differently from open fire. Firelight announces. Embers persist. They no longer define the room visually. They define it structurally as something still warm at the center even when the sleeping place has gone dark. This gives the hall its deeper layers now. Sleeping place nearest, the wall and darker room around it, the farther floor and hearth side beyond that, the embering lower center, the rafters and roof dark above, and beyond all of that, the winter continuing around the outer walls in its own soft white measure. The hall keeps these layers without asking you to map them precisely. You know them because you are already inside them. For a long while there is no sound at all, or none worth separating from the whole. That interval matters. It is not an absence between events. It is the deep hall condition itself, the kind of held quiet in which even the smallest sound, if it comes, will not feel like interruption, only like part of what it means for this structure to continue being alive around its sleepers. Then one does come. A board or beam somewhere in the farther reaches answers the cold with a single quiet note. It does not repeat. It resolves itself completely in the moment it arrives. After it, the silence of the hall is not emptier than before. It is fuller. The sound has not broken anything. It has proved that the quiet here belongs to a built place, not vacancy. Outside, the snow continues, still not as separate flakes or visible movement, only as the sustained unreadability beyond wall and roof. The world outside the hall is now reduced to one condition: white dark, winter held, snow softened. No path can be followed there from the sleeping place. No visible detail could improve the body's rest if it were available. Snow has completed its work. It has removed the need for the outer world to remain legible. This leaves the hall more complete. No yard to think about, no sky to consult, no weather to monitor. Only the sleeping place held within the hall, and the hall held against the winter beyond it. The body begins to feel the difference between these layers less sharply. The fur remains heavier at the lower body than at the shoulder. The bolster remains firmer at its ends than at the center. The bed place remains warmer than the room around it, and the hall beyond warmer in some lower parts than in the roof dark above. These differences do not vanish. They simply stop requiring active registration. The body no longer needs to refresh them each time awareness brushes against them. They become part of one broader heldness. That is how deep night begins to earn itself, not by making everything the same, by making the distinctions less useful. Another long interval passes, no ember settling below, no timber answer in the wall, no shift from the outer dark that the ear can make use of. Only the sleeping place and the hall continuing to hold their own arrangements in silence. Then, much later, or perhaps not very much later, because time is beginning to lose its sharper edges here, the faintest inward settling sounds again from below. Not the fire taking new wood, not flame. Only the slow interior answer of what remains after flame has done its brighter work. The embers are still there. The farther hearth side is still being kept. The hall does not cool all at once from the center outward. It releases evening in longer measures than that. You do not need to turn toward the sound. It already belongs to the structure. That is the beauty of an old hall once it enters its deep night. Its small continuances do not require witness to remain reassuring. The sleeping place has altered again without any action from you, not because it has become softer, because it has become more exact. The place where the body lies is no longer the bedding in general. It is your place within it, the bolster accepted, the lower layers no longer cool, the covers weight familiar enough to disappear into function. Even the platform beneath, which had been readable through shoulder, side, thigh, and hip when you first laid down, has withdrawn from specific notice into simple support. The room around that sleeping place is doing the same. The ledge beside you, if it is still consciously known at all, is no longer ledge as object. It is just the nearer side of the sleeping place. The wall is no longer boards and seams. It is the darker side of the hall. The far room is no longer chest and shield and bench and table. It is the farther hall. The outer weather is no longer something outside the walls. It is simply where the white dark begins. The great hall is sleeping into one shape around you, not by becoming quieter or softer, but by asking less and less for its parts to be kept apart. A faint ember settling below is real because it rises out of a long-held stretch of hall dark in which nothing at all has asked to be noticed. A timber note in the wall would be real for the same reason. The sounds are small. That is what the hall offers at this hour. Not silence, but enough sustained quiet for the smallest continuances to feel natural, unthreatening, and complete. The body has no wish to move. Motion has lost its usefulness. Nothing waits to be improved. If the shoulders shifted, the hall would not become more night. If the coverings were adjusted, the sleeping place would not become more trustworthy. The active systems of evening have withdrawn one by one. What remains is a deeper passivity than any earlier part of the night could honestly claim. The outside world is almost gone now in every way that matters. The snow beyond the walls no longer even feels like something falling. It feels like a condition that has already completed itself around the hall. Whatever movement the weather still has belongs to the world at a distance. What reaches you here is only its result. A softened outer dark, a muffled winter, an old hall held inside white night. That is why the structure can feel so complete. It is not merely closed against winter. It has been gradually made central by winter, fire by fire, season by season, use by use, until this deep night hour when the body no longer has to distinguish much between hall holding and bed holding at all. The embers below sound once more, very faintly. Then not again for a long time. The memory of their warmth is now doing more work than the sound itself. The lower hearth remains part of the hall body, but no longer as visible evening, no longer even as strongly audible night. It has passed into reassurance. A fire once made, a warmth still continuing, a farther hall already completed and now carrying its share of the night without help. You lie above that in the sleeping place, and the whole hall lies under roof and snow. There is almost nothing left to follow. The lamp is gone. The evening tasks are gone. The visible room is mostly gone. The world beyond the walls has gone into white dark. Even the embers below are now more remembered than heard. What remains is the hall at its deepest settled point. The sleeping place holds. The room holds. The lower warmth holds. The roof dark holds. The outer winter holds. The snow continues its unreadable work around the walls. A final small sound comes from somewhere in the timbered body of the hall. Not below exactly, not beside you exactly, only somewhere within the structure where cold, wood, and long use meet in the middle hours. It is so slight it barely establishes itself as event before it resolves again into the larger held condition. After that, nothing or nothing worth separating. And there, with the lamp withdrawn, the hearth reduced to ember presence, the outer world softened almost completely out of use by snow and dark, and the great hall no longer presenting itself in places and objects, but as one winter structure carrying the body through its deepest night, the hall settles as far as it can settle. There comes a point in the night when the dark stops deepening. It does not lighten yet. It does not loosen into morning. It simply reaches the farthest point of itself and remains there for a while without going farther. You notice the change first not by sight, but by the hall. The coolness remains, yet it has altered. It no longer feels like something still gathering through the timbers and outer walls. It is simply there now, settled where it means to remain until day begins to work on it again. The sleeping place still keeps its own warmth beneath fur and blanket. The bolster still holds the shape of your head. The platform still supports the body in one broad, steady line. Yet the darkness around these things has changed from something complete into something waiting to be changed. For a little while, almost nothing follows from that. No clear light yet from the outer wall. No distinct sound from beyond the hall. Only the knowledge, faint as breath in winter air, that the night has carried itself as far as it needs to go. The great room feels this too. It remains quiet, but not with quite the same depth of inwardness as before. In the deepest hour, sleeping place, farther hall, hearth below, beams above, roof under snow, and white dark beyond the walls had nearly ceased to stand apart. Now the first smallest separations begin to return, not because the body asks for them, only because time has altered the dark enough for the hall to begin becoming itself again. The edge of the sleeping place returns first, not clearly, only as one softer dark against another. The rail nearest the body becomes knowable before it becomes visible. Then the fur folded near the shoulder gathers a little more shape of its own. Then the line where the wall rises beside the platform begins to hold itself apart from the bed place below it. The hall has not come back yet. Only the nearest world has begun to do so. You do not need to move in order to feel that. The outer layer resting over the rail is still only a denser patch of dark. The ledge where the lamp was left remains mostly hidden. The farther end of the platform keeps no detail at all. Yet the darkness between these things has thinned. The sleeping place no longer holds as one continuous shadow. It begins, by degrees too small to measure, to separate itself back into relations. Outside, the snow has changed the morning before you can see it fully. That is one of the quiet truths of winter halls. While the structure keeps the night within, the weather continues its own work beyond the walls without witness. Whatever gathered along the yard, the fence, the path, the roof edge, the outer threshold, the woodpile, the drifted corners where wall meets ground, has already remade the world by the time the sleeping place begins to know it again. The first true light is not light exactly. It is gray, a diluted gray gathering somewhere beyond the wall opening, and the narrow seams where the hall meets morning, enough to find the outline of the nearer timber and hold there. The sleeping place receives none of it directly at first. It belongs first to the hall's edge, then to the room, and only later to the body. That order is right. Morning in a winter structure should not arrive as brightness. It should arrive as permission for things to become visible again. The bed place now exists not only through touch, but by outline. The rise of the covering over your knees, the lower slope where it falls away at the foot, the dimmer shape of the bolster beside your face where no head rests, the line of the platform edge beneath the heavier fur. None of these asks to be examined. They simply return. So does the hall. The wall nearest the platform comes back first as a vertical relation. Then the carved upright at the bed end, not yet in detail, only as a darker form with one slightly lighter worn edge. Then the ledge beside you, still bare of its objects in sight, but present again as part of the sleeping place's boundary. The farther hall remains mostly tone, but now tone with distance inside it rather than one single depthless dark. Below and farther out, the hall answers once. A board or stair, or one of the longer timbers answering the change in cold, not loudly enough to become event, only clearly enough to say that the room is no longer in its deepest, undivided state. The sound does not disturb the sleeping place. It restores the structure around it. The farther floor exists again. The lower hall exists again. The hearth side exists again, though still mostly in relation rather than in sight. The sleeping place remains warm. That matters more than any returning light, because the hall's reappearance does not ask the body to leave what the night has already made good. The coverings keep their settled weight. The bolster has lost all trace of its first unfamiliarity. The lower bedding no longer presents itself as separate wool, fur, and platform beneath the body. It remains broad and honest under shoulder, side, and thigh. Morning may return the hall to sight, but the sleeping place still keeps the deeper truth of what the night has done. The gray begins to hold color rather than tone. Not much, only enough that what lies beyond the hall shifts toward the pale, whitened quality of snow-reflected morning rather than ordinary dawn. That is how the outer world returns here, not through horizon or sun, but through what the snow gives back to the light. Even before the opening is read clearly, you know the morning beyond the hall will not be the same world that lay outside in the winter afternoon yesterday. The night has remade it. When at last you turn your head a little toward that pale, returning edge, the hall moves with you in a more recognizable way. The opening is opening again. The wall is wall. The pale field beyond is not sky alone, and not ground alone, but both whitened together by snow. If you were to rise and go to the edge of the hall now, the yard, the fence, the outer path, the roofline, the stacked wood, the drifted corners, the far trees or darker posts beyond would all still be there, but altered. Softer in one way, clearer in another. The night snow would have filled some seams, rounded some edges, laid a brighter stillness over everything that had gone dark too early to be watched. You do not need to rise to know this. The hall brings the knowledge inward through light before it asks anything of the body. The lower part of the room begins to return in the same way, not all at once, not as activity, only in relation. The hearth below is no longer merely ember presence and stored warmth held in the structure. It is becoming the hearth again. The long bench exists there, whether seen or not. The board beside it still holds cup and spoon where they were set aside. The post exists there with its worn carving. The chest remains against the wall. The shield hangs where it hung through the night. All these things reform below the sleeping place, not because they are fully seen, but because the hall no longer needs to hold itself as one sleeping body only. Morning allows it to become great room again. A little more light reaches inward. The carved bed-end takes a faint grain. The wall board beside you separates from the next by seam and tone. The ledge keeps its shape. Farther out, one line of bench edge reappears. Then the darker round of the shield boss, still dim, but back in the room. The hall is returning object by object without asking for attention to any one of them for long. Outside, the snow-muted world grows clearer by degrees. The brightness at the hall's edge no longer belongs only to sky. It belongs to ground as well. That is the great winter reversal. Morning light does not merely descend from above. It rises too, reflected back from what the snow has laid over roof, threshold, fence, yard, track, and outer earth. The world beyond the hall is not brighter because the sun is high. It is brighter because the ground has been whitened into answering it. You shift only enough to let the sleeping place settle more comfortably around wakefulness without fully entering it. The body need not leave the platform for the cycle to complete. The hall only needs to become visible again in the right order. Sleeping place, nearer wall, farther hall, lower hearth, outside world, morning held over snow. A faint sound comes from outside at last. Not many, not the full beginning of day. only one small signal that the world beyond the hall has started again in its own time. A distant footstep on snow-softened ground, or the muffled closure of a door or gate, or the first careful movement of someone in the cold before the day has gathered pace. The snow changes these sounds too. It keeps them from carrying sharply. It rounds them before they reach the wall of the hall. The hall remains gentler than they are. That may be the finest truth of the ending. The great room has carried the night so fully that the morning does not have to arrive as interruption. It can return quietly, edge by edge, timber by timber, object by object, without breaking the rest it has protected. The sleeping place now stands fully in snow-muted morning form. The carved end post pale at its worn edge, the platform holding its length again, the coverings visibly inhabited, the bolster marked by the night's long use. The wall beside you returned in morning quiet rather than lamplight. The farther hall reformed beyond it. Below and farther out, the structure is hall again. Bench, post, table, shield, chest, hearth, outer door, the threshold still shut against winter. Outside, the snow continues its work even when no longer falling. It lies, it holds, it keeps the world slowed. The yard beyond the door will be paler now than it was yesterday. The fence edge wider, the threshold marked in brightness, the roof carrying a cleaner line, the trampled places softened or covered over. The farther ground gathered into simpler form under the new day. All of that remains there waiting, but none of it needs to be checked before rest can deepen fully into sleep. The great hall has held through the whole cycle, reached in winter afternoon, gathered by fire, made inward through evening, narrowed into the sleeping place, settled through deep night, returned now in snow-muted morning. Because it has done all of that, nothing more has to be watched over. You lie within the last quiet of that completion. The sleeping place still holds. The hall has returned. The structure has separated gently back into its places and kept things. The snow has remade the world outside. Morning has come far enough for everything to be trustworthy again. There is no need to rise yet. No need to look more closely. No need to tend the hearth at once, or lift the board cup, or go to the threshold, or read the yard beyond the walls. Those things belong to the day that will happen later. For now, the hall has done what it needed to do. It held the winter outside. It held the fire inside. It held the evening, the lower warmth, the sleeping place, the deep dark, and the returning light. And there, with the snow-lit morning now resting quietly at the edges of the great room, the hall restored to itself after the long inward hours, and the whole winter cycle completed, so fully that nothing in it needs your keeping anymore. The final truth arrives as naturally as the first fire did. The hall will carry the rest. The snow can go on whitening the world beyond the walls. The hearth can wait in its pale morning stillness. The bench can remain by the fire. The cup can remain where it was set aside. The outer path can keep its new brightness in the yard beyond the door. You are already inside what needed to be reached. The hall has held. The night has passed. The morning has come back changed, and with nothing left now to prepare, follow, or keep in place, you can let yourself drift the rest of the way down, while the winter great hall goes on holding the day for you.